this process for the next 1 hour. And I mean, so let's all of us just introduce ourselves 1 minute each, less than a minute actually, just your name and the organization so we can know who is on the line.
Morning, everyone. My name is McDonald, and I'm from the National Association of Youth Organizations, part of the CPDE sector. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sowana, and I work as a research and policy specialist. I work for Cooperation Committee for Cambodia, CCC, and nice to meet you all.
Are there others online? Please feel free to introduce yourself. Thank you.
If you're having problems with your audio, maybe you can just type it in. Like, hi, Wawan.
I don't know, do you assume others are not able to speak to the microphone? Please, before you talk, make sure you unmute your equipment before you talk so everybody else can hear you. Thank you. Okay, if there's nobody else on the phone, can you confirm to us, Stephen, how many are there?
We can just have a rundown of the listed participants, which I'm hoping is connected. So the ones that introduce themselves, we have McDonald, Major and I, Savannah, Wawan. And for those who have yet to introduce themselves, we have we have Ahmed, we have Esther, we have Eugene, we have Manasyan, and that's all we have. So now we have a total of 10 participants in this call. Now, for those who have not actually introduced themselves, if you could just type in really quickly in the chat box where you're coming from, who you're speaking to, that'll be kind of helpful.
Okay, maybe we listen to them when after during the day.
I think we can.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So I'm going to give it to you, Major.
Thank you very much, Stephen, and thank you indeed for organizing this session. It's very helpful to help us in preparing for the third round monitoring, but also in facilitating our report writing as CSOs in the next third round monitoring. This session is going to last us for 1 hour, and we have set out a couple of objectives that we want to achieve and areas that we want to cover in the next 15 or so minutes. So the first thing we want to be able to share with you is the provide a report, a background on the Global Partnership Monitoring Exercise, which you've all signed on to. And in that context, we'll also want to give you the history of CPD engagement with this process and how we will see you playing your role. The second element will be to speak to you about the political relevance of monitoring to us as CSOs and particularly to CPD, and just highlight some of what we see as our main objectives as CPD with regard to this exercise. The third issue will be to explain to you our own engagement strategy with regard to the monitoring itself, but also because we have expanded a bit in terms of engagement, the areas of coverage we want to give to this round of monitoring. So we should be able to speak to that as well. And of course, the fourth issue will be about your role as a country focal point and the responsibilities that we are trying to put on you in order for us to be successful in producing a report that speaks to CSO needs, but also holds governments accountable with regard to the commitments they've taken. And then fifth, briefly, we'll speak to the issue around the CSO report and what it is for, and how we want it to be used going forward. So these are the main broad areas that we intend to cover in the next 15 minutes. If there are any questions like Stephen suggested initially, we will provide time for us to go through those questions, but also to clarify some issues that will not be very clear. So let's go back to the objective number one, which is we want to equip you with the background information on the third round global monitoring, and particularly to also give you specifics on our own engagement strategy as CPDE to help in preparing you for the assignment that you're about to take on. Now let's begin with the elements around the background for the monitoring exercise. As you already know, CPD is part of the global monitoring framework. It is part of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, and monitoring is indeed one of the key instruments that we use to collect and monitor progress on commitments that were taken by governments and ourselves, and especially following up from Busan and now Nairobi. The global monitoring framework seeks to track country-level progress in implementing 4 principles of effective development cooperation, and I'm sure we all know those principles, including democratic ownership, inclusive partnership, transparency and accountability, and result focus. So we're basically seeking to monitor progress on those 4 principles, and those have been defined into 10 indicators that are currently underway being monitored, are currently underway in different stages of monitoring in your various countries. We see monitoring as a very important tool indeed for measuring accountability, particularly from the government side. Because, like I said, there are 10 indicators, and governments have a responsibility to ensure that there's progress on most of those. And there is a particular one that speaks to CSOs that we'll speak to, which is on indicator 2. Now, with regard to the monitoring exercise itself, what it is important for us to understand is that this process heavily relies on country leadership, meaning that the research, the monitoring is country-led. By country-led, in this case, government is going to be on the driving seat in setting the tone, in setting up the process that is going to take shape, and then after that, there will be collection of data in that context, and that data then should be validated by all the stakeholders. So the point we are trying to make here is it is about accountability, indeed, and this accountability is, like we said in Nairobi, is aligned to the 2030 agenda of the SDG, but now we are saying that in that context, country still has to lead the process. The process has to result into new data or evidence, and there has to be a dialogue of that data, right? A second issue is the centrality of country-led monitoring to GPDC accountability. Like we said, this is a unique statement of accountability. There's no any global process that does monitoring like the GPDC does it. So it is very important that in this exercise, because one, it is being done at a level where we as CPD, we as CSOs are engaged, which is at the country level, but this also has a high probability of having a big impact in the SDG agenda, because we said Nairobi was about aligning GPDC to the SDG agenda, and in that context will contribute to the HLFPF process going forward. So it's important that we engage with this process. Now, in terms of monitoring itself, what we also need you to understand is that apart from the 2016 process, the 2018 process has undergone a bit of reform. There's a lot of revision on the indicators that were put forward. And in that context, the revisions were made to align the monitoring exercise to the SDG of the 2030 agenda. And so you'll have 10 indicators which will seek to measure progress, including indicator 2, which will be talking about CSO enabling environment and development effectiveness. I'll speak more to this CSO enabling environment and development effectiveness indicator because we have changed it considerably in terms of the approach, in terms of the whole exercise, and requires a bit more nuancing, a bit more dialoguing in terms of arriving at the data component. In terms of, and this exercise, like we said also, is part of the global partnership process, and it is highly supported by the joint support team. In that context, they still have a responsibility to provide global support to countries who want to assist. And CPDE is there also to support your efforts in terms of your engagement with this process. The other issue that I also want to bring to your attention has to do with the how we have previously engaged with the monitoring. This is the second round we are actively engaging. Sorry, the third round actually. We are actually actively engaging with monitoring exercise. The first round was in 2014, where CPDE basically just collected its data and then submitted to the joint support team in the hope that that would also influence the process. But in the second round monitoring, which was 2016, I believe some of you participated actively at the national level to influence the indicator 2 data collection mechanisms. And in that context, what we want to share with you is that there were significant challenges in areas of mutual accountability, democratic ownership, and CSO enabling environment. And that was what was coming out of those reports. But I think also in terms of process, you will remember that as focal points, we went through different challenges, including countries not recognizing your presence or your voices, or choosing which CSOs to engage with. And so that has informed considerably how we want to approach this third round monitoring, and particularly in seeking to put forward the role that CPDE needs to play in the process with regard to the national context, but also with regard to the CSO independent process in our engaging with this exercise. Okay. Now let me just roll that back a bit and put forward the issue around how the third round third round monitoring is going to take place at the national level, or in some countries it has already started. Okay. In terms of process, like I explained before, countries are supposed to commence the national process. The national process was supposed to be commenced through a launch. So we understand some countries already did the launch, others did not, but they've already notified various development partners of the commencement of the process. And we hope some of you have already been informed. We also understand some have not been informed. But just to understand that the national process has to be officially commenced by the government. And in that case, every country has to appoint a national coordinator. And the role of the national coordinator is to facilitate this process and then ensure that there is a multi-stakeholder participation. What usually happens is most of these national coordinators will either be officials from the Ministry of Finance, or governments would hire a consultant or somebody else to help them in facilitating this exercise. But what is important for you, particularly with regard to this process, is that this national coordinator has very important role, one for reaching out, but two for planning the whole exercise, and three, leading that exercise, but ensuring, thirdly, that there is a national validation that should take place after the data has been collected. So a national, like we've said already, a national coordinator is very important going forward, and is somebody that you really need to get to know if you are to engage strongly in this exercise. I don't know if that is clear up to now, so I can move to the next phase. Yeah. So let me then focus on the CPDE part, or how we envision our own engagement with this exercise. Like I said before, this process is very important for us as CSOs. So I'll use CPDE and CSO interchangeably to imply that when I talk about CSOs, in this respect, I'm trying to say to use the platform CPDE to advance the issue that I'll be putting forth. Now, there are fundamental issues that I want to bring to your attention when it comes to why CPDE is interested in this exercise. The first objective and the first rationale why we're really keen on this is to uphold accountability of this global partnership. Like we say, there are 10 indicators countries have committed to 4 principles, and we want to be able to measure progress with regard to those commitments. So the first reason why we are interested in participating to this exercise is that we must ensure that the monitoring exercise indeed leads to one issue of behavior change at the national level, and we really urge look out for that. But two, it is also for us to be able to improve the quality of progress so that we are able to show both progress, stagnation, and lack of progress. So our engagement in this exercise should be able to reflect various facets of both of all the stages, whether there's progress or not, or whether there's stagnation. And the main essence is not just recording progress, but there is a notable behavior change from all the development partners, particularly governments and donors. The other issue that the other objective why we are interested in this is to advance core issues that are of importance to CSOs, particularly with regard to the issues that touch on issues of democratic ownership, the issues of transparency and accountability, and also the issues of addressing enabling environment for CSOs. I think we are particularly concerned about the issues of shrinking space for CSOs that are measured on indicator 2. So we want to be able to continue advancing or putting on the table fundamental issues that are key for progress. And I think elements around democratic ownership, elements around enabling condition, enabling environment for CSOs remain very important for us in terms of ensuring that indeed there is progress on commitments that were taken on those elements. The third issue objective why we are also interested in this is to supplement technical limitations of the third round monitoring, because we know that in terms of collecting data, especially on indicator 2, governments and development partners don't really get it. And I think we know from the last exercise that indicator 2 particularly is very labor intensive and requires a lot of time and energies to be spent on it. And as a result of that, governments have tended to gloss over these aspects of the indicator. So CPD basically is seeking to provide a richer, much more intense data that could be used to facilitate dialogue and engagement on this important element. The other issue why we engage in this, the other rationale has to do with providing political guidance to this technical exercise. I think one of the things that we try to address is people behaving as though things are still operating in the context of business as usual. Since we aligned ourselves to the SDG agenda, then the business becomes unusual. And in that context, we still have to maintain the political momentum for us to be able to really achieve not only the global partnership objectives, but achieve SDGs through Goal 17. And so we still engage in this process to ensure that indeed the steps that we take are consistent with the objectives of ratcheting up the progress, but at the same time ensuring that indeed the work that the global partnership does helps us achieve the political objectives that we had set up for ourselves as a platform. The fifth issue, which is also connected to the second issue, is providing additional contribution and perspective to the body of evidence that will be produced in the third round monitoring. Like I said, we provide much more nuanced, detailed information to capture the spirit of the principles. And part of what we will do is to provide additional data towards the third round monitoring. And this time round, unlike the second round monitoring, we are going beyond the indicator 2, and we've identified other indicators that I'll present shortly that we'll also want you to cover to ensure that the elements around inclusivity, in elements around transparency and engagement are captured in all the 10 indicators, even if we may not have data for those indicators. So that is how this time round, this exercise remains very important. And like we said, it is much more important because this is the first time we are going to go through an exercise that is 100% aligned to the SDG Goal 17. It is the first time that the results of this monitoring will be used for ensuring that we are able to contribute considerably to the third round agenda. Okay. Maybe then I can move on to the third elements, which have to do with CPD engagement on this exercise. I'm being advised that maybe instead of going through this CPD engagement, which I think we've already dealt with why we are interested in this, is to go through the indicators so that we can maybe focus more on your role and responsibilities going forward. If that is okay, then I can move on. Is that okay? Unfortunately, you can't say yes because your mic is is muted. But yeah, so let's just move on that. We have for CPDE, we have identified a couple of indicators that will want your input. Okay, and we are going to address those through the four principle framework that we laid out before. And the first indicator is indicator 1A and indicator 1B, which measures focus on result. Okay, and on this indicator, we're going to look at the issue of country results framework, and in that context, we are interested in how countries are coming up with their results framework, their quality, and their inclusiveness on how they are involving CSOs in those exercises, right? The second block of indicators cover ownership of development priorities by developing countries. And in that regard, we'll be looking at indicator 9 and indicator 10, which measures public finance management systems and the issue of an untied aid. And then, of course, there will be the third group of indicators of principles which cover inclusive partnership. So the group of indicators that cover inclusive development partnership, and there we have indicator 2, which will measure CSO enabling environment and development effectiveness. And then we have indicator 3, which talks about private public sector, public-private dialogue. And then the last group of indicator is going to be touching on transparency and accountability to each other. And that is on indicator 4, which measures availability of transparent information on development cooperation. And then indicator 7, which measures mutual accountability among development partners. And lastly, indicator 8, which measures gender equality and women's empowerment. Now, in these aspects, what I need to bring to your attention is that, like I said before, CPD is interested in most of these indicators. And we have the ones that I've mentioned here already are the ones that CPD is going to be doing something about. So that is indicator 1B and 1A and B, indicator 9, indicator 10, indicator 2 and 3, indicator 4 and 7 and 8, and indicator 3 as well. This is how we are going to organize this because we don't have a lot of time. On indicator 1 and 2, we are interested in how CSOs have been consulted in country result framework. So it's first of all establishing whether there is a national development strategy and the results framework to measure that, and whether you've been involved, and whether governments recognize the existence of CSO on result framework. So those are the elements that we want to look at. So we've developed 3 sets of strategy for engagement. One is that we've developed, we have a list of questions around these indicators that we'll want you to fill up. And then 2, we have assigned responsibility to specialized CSOs who are going to help us in filling up the issue around the untied aid, and then the indicator 3 on private sector. So these 2 indicators will be measured by Eurodad and a working group in private sector respectively, okay? Then we also have the indicator 8, which is gender equality and women's empowerment. We encourage all of you to fill in these questions, but we also strongly advise you to give those list of questions to the gender experts, gender groups to help you with that exercise, okay? To fill in, because they are very specialized and you may not have data on that. So we strongly urge you to consult with the feminist groups in your countries to be able to help you fill back. So I'll repeat that again. For this round of monitoring, CPDE has expanded its level of engagement, and in that regard, it has those additional indicators that we want you to work on. The first one, like you said, is indicator 1A and B, and then we'll expect you also to provide data on indicator 2. Indicator 3, you will not have to fill anything because we require a different structure to work on that. But when it comes to the issue around indicator 2 on enabling environment, you are going to engage in that and provide data for that. And of course, the other indicators touching on transparency, issues around mutual accountability, and that we'll expect you to provide data in that regard. I hope that is clear. So, like we said again, we will have within you'll have a document that has additional questions to indicator 1, 4, 7, and 9. And then you will have another summarized list of questions on indicator 8, which is gender equality and women empowerment. And then you'll have methodology and guidelines on how you should be able to carry out this exercise. I hope that is clear up to there. Okay. Let me move on quickly because we are running out of time a bit. Our advice to you in terms of process is that you should answer all the questions that will be presented to you in the booklet. So it is important that you collect all the data for those questions and answer them according to the technical guidelines that CPDE is going to provide you with. So it's important that you will focus on collecting data. But now, in terms of how this takes shape, is after you've collected the data on all the indicators, you could do two things. First thing that you could do, if the process has not already taken shape in your country, is to collect this data, write it properly, and then send it to the national focal point for inclusion in the national reporting. The second step is you could then send this data to, you will send this data to CPDE, because this time around CPDE plans to produce its own version of report on the level of progress for the third round monitoring. So that's what we're planning to do. Now, the government is expecting us to submit feedback on indicator 2 only. That is okay. So we will expect you to have a deliberate process of collecting data on that indicator. I think most of you participated in the 2 rounds of training that were conducted by CPDE on this indicator. So we'll urge you to collect that data and submit it to the government, and also submit a portion of that to CPDE. And that should be part of the global data that you should be able to submit. Now, in terms of process, this is what we are requesting of you to do as a country focal point. The first thing that we want you to do is liaise quickly the national focal point, if you have not done so, and ensure that and demand participation in the exercise. And also not just you as a focal point, but it is usually more useful if you bring other 2 or 3 more colleagues to join you in that exercise. So we are particularly interested in how you're going to engage on the indicator 2. What had happened before in other countries is you as CSOs would convene quickly and fill in the questionnaire on your own, and then you'd approach the government to the national coordinator to convene a multi-stakeholder process for filling in the final or for dialoguing on the report on indicator 2. So you should first of all have your own process filled, then have advise government to do the same and donors do the same, and then have one gathering where you meet and discuss the findings, okay, and agree on the country report. But what is important for you is you must organize and coordinate CSO participation beyond just your network. That is very important because there's also an issue of credibility on how we mobilize other CSOs to engage and participate in this process. So it is important that you organize and mobilize participation at country level and make sure that they include, participate in collecting data on all the other indicators, okay? You also must ensure that the views of the CSOs that are collected from this exercise is part of the report that you submit to the government, okay? The third issue that we wanted to do is share with CPDE that report so that it is part of the data that we'll use in producing the CPDE global report going forward. The third issue is, if possible, we are still trying to work out the mechanics. If you didn't participate in the training, it is important that some of you will be invited to participate and attend the training going forward in how this exercise is going to take shape going forward in terms of data collection. The idea here is, while we are aligned to the national data collection process, we are not necessarily restricted to it. Because like we said, we'll be providing data for two purposes. One, for the national process, especially with regard to indicator 2, but 2, for the CPDE report. And the CPDE report is going to be the CSO report on progress from the third round monitoring, because we've discovered that once these country reports are sent to the OECD, they tend to be manipulated. So we want your own version so that we can report on issues of democratic ownership, issues of shrinking space, and the issues of human rights-based approach on addressing development challenges facing our respective countries. So it is really, really, really important that as CSOs, you have your own process for collecting this data, and this data can be helpful in the national exercise and should be helpful in the national exercise, but it is going to be very important for CPDE exercise in terms of how we produce the data. So those are the elements that I wanted to cover with you today. Unless there are any questions, I'll be very happy to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Major. Time check, it's 45 minutes past the hour. And since we started 10 minutes past the hour, I think we still have about 25 minutes for questions. So please feel free to jot down your questions in the chat box. And I will leave it to Major to kind of organize the questions himself and decide which to answer first.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, Daya. I encourage you to actually use the chat box for your questions. For all.
No, let him just ask so we can, because we don't have a lot of time. If the question is short and it's just a factual issue, let's let them ask, please. Go ahead.
Also, in this monitoring process in Nepal. But the questionnaire is quite different than last time. Questionnaire is last time we were asked.
Did we lose you? Hello?
Hello?
Please just ask the questions, then type the question so we can
Stefan,
proceed.
hello. Stefan, hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
but we are having trouble.
Type the question so we.
The question is, the questionnaire is different from 2016. Could you please, make clear about that? And this time, the government asks us to just fill up. There is like a, select, not to write anything, So could you please?
Okay. So there are two. I've had the questions. There's one also that has been typed down there that I want to respond to. The issue of time, resource, and money and capacity. I think as CPD, we are very cognizant of this, that we maybe don't have a lot of time if this is linked to the official process, because the data collection should have already begun. But I want to just calm your nerves on that, instead that this is going to be, what we are talking about is a CSO exercise now, that we want to produce data for our own report, one, but two, also use this as a basis of providing data that could beef up the national process. So that's the way we are looking at this. And in that regard, for CPD, we are foreseeing that we should be able to finish this exercise by April 2019. So between now and 2019, we should be able to go through the data collection and verification, and then writing the report for that period of time. So that's where we're looking at this. And that is why we are advising you that when it comes to the issue of indicator 2, it is important that already we fill in the questionnaire and have a CSO process in that regard to help with that data collection and submit that to the government. But also what we need to recognize is that this, unlike the previous round, this exercise is not just to gather data and give to government. We want to be able to produce our own report, so we will still request you to retain that data and submit it to us for our own CPD report production. So that's the way I look at this. With regard to the questionnaire being different, yes, it is true. The first thing I want to indicate to you is that this exercise, the monitoring round, went through a lot of review in terms of questionnaires and the questions that were asked. And the reason for that is the need to align that to the SDG agenda. That is why you're seeing the questions are a bit different. But specifically to the way it has been done, particularly on indicator 2, you have, instead of people saying yes and no, or maybe, or yes and no, and then provide details, we are saying that did not provide comparative data analysis framework. And so we said we are going to do what we call ranking. So you would have all the questions. You'll have the questions, yes, with different characteristics that you need to fill to go through and try to relate those characteristics with your country's situation, and then decide which level or which rank best describes your country context. So, for example, in the indicator 2, you would have questions around legal and regulatory framework, and then you'll have the right of association, and then you'll describe all those things. So the question is, for us, yes, we recognize there's the changes, but the changes actually make it easier, simpler, so that we want to be able to standardize the way in which we describe and report on the country context. But also what I want to explain to you from the experience of some of us who've gone through it is you will find a characteristic fitting well within your country, but it has maybe maybe the characteristics is level 2, okay? But then when you go to level 1, there are certain elements that are there that are still relevant to your country context. So it means that you will, yes, agree to level 2, but then still be able to make a however, okay? That despite this progress, despite this level, these challenges still exist. So you bring those level issues from level 1 and indicate them as added issues that need to be worked on going forward. So that's the way we've looked at that. I don't know if that is clear. Are there any questions?
Perhaps we can. There's
Thank you so
questions.
much. I got it.
Please go ahead, Daya.
I thank you. Thank you for clarification. I got it.
Okay, so Eugene is asking about additional questions on the different indicators. Yes, indeed, this is going to be part of the material that we will be sending to you to help you with the data collection. So those indicators that I said I put out before, indicator 1, indicator 8, indicator 2, indicator 7 and 9, those indicators the additional questions will be given to you, will be sent to you alongside the ones on indicator 2. So this time around, like I said, expect that there will be 2 levels of response, of answers or feedback we want from you. One is on the indicator 2, as it were, and 2 will be on these additional indicators whose questions will be sent to you on time, and the guidelines on why those questions are the way they are. Okay.
Actually, if I may, Major, the accompanying technical guide already houses all the questions from all the other indicators. So it has been shared to the focal points in English, and we are waiting for the Spanish and French versions this week.
Yeah, so like Steve says, you already have this, but we are still working on just if there are any challenges with those, we'll ask you to give us feedback so we can really synthesize them to make them simple and clear and more helpful to you.
I believe there are still 2 questions in the chat box right now.
Okay, can you ask them, please?
One by Ahmed and one by Eugene.
What is the question by Ahmed and Eugene?
The question by Ahmed is about 2 paragraphs long. So what he's trying to say is that Bangladesh submitted report to JST on the 31st of October. CSOs, development partners.
Just read it and then you will present it as I respond to Eugene's question because I already have it. Okay. So Eugene is asking about sharing the report on indicator 2 only, and yet there are more indicators. That is a fair point, Eugene. Actually, our advice is to submit all the responses, but from the government is that we are only filling up sections on indicator 2. But they've always assumed that we don't have technical capacity to respond to the other indicators. So if by any chance you are able to finish your exercise before the national validation, by all means, we encourage you and urge you to submit the full report with a list of the questions and the responses to the government. But so we also urge you to send the same to us. So we are not limiting you to the kind of indicator responses you can send to the government, but you are free to do that. But yeah, that's the way I would respond to that. Yes, Steve.
Major, if you could actually just go to the chat box real quick. The question by Ahmed is quite hefty and it's quite difficult to read out loud. Ahmed, are you in the line? Okay, Ahmed, if you could speak, please go ahead.
I mean, Ahmed is raising the question around how to expand this, how the participation and involvement of CSOs, broader coalition of CSOs in this exercise, which I think is a valid point, and the need for resources and skills to do this. I think indeed as CPD, we recognize the importance of this, and that is why we already did 2 trainings for country focal points on indicator 2, to be able to engage intensively in the exercise. We are running a bit late, but the plan was to have another physical training on all the indicators this time round for all the country, for a specific number of focal points, like 15 to 20. Those who have not participated at all in any of the trainings, and then the ones who participated in the indicator 2 training before, we would organize a webinar for them to be able to engage the other indicators. So that is how we envision this. In terms of resources, I think what we are envisioning is we had budgeted for monitoring resources, finances, to be able to support country processes. The challenge we are facing is the donor is taking too long to send these resources to us. So it's become a bit difficult for us to be able to launch the training, but we are still hoping that once these resources come in, we should be able to do the training, but also give some small monies to help with holding meetings or holding national processes to collect this data. So that's how we're planning to address that. Okay. Any questions? Any other questions?
I think we still have that one from McDonald.
What is McDonald asking?
How does CPD intend to avail support to its focal points to aid the work?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about in terms of resources. We have a budget that is supposed to support country processes. We're just waiting for the donor to approve to make the disbursement for the funding, so we are able to support a specific number of countries. We are also going to avail a physical training on all the indicators once the resources are available. We had planned to do this actually this month, but that didn't happen. So we are still hopeful that it should be able to happen. In any case, we are hoping that by January, we close this process of the preparatory work towards data collection, and the whole month, from 3rd week of January to, let's say, end of March, we should be doing data collection and reporting. Yeah. Any other questions? I think I don't know. Does have any more time?
It's actually right at the hour, so we can end now, but I say we still have 10 minutes since we started a bit late. So if anyone has any more questions, feel free. Oh, I think Josiah has a question on, you mean that we should conclude data collection by mid-January? Actually, we are actually,
No.
I'll let you answer it, Meja.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
We are still planning on a face-to-face meeting mid-January. Assuming that pushes through, we are looking at the conclusion of data collection by the end of February, actually. Did I get your question right, Josiah?
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I got your question correct, because I was a bit worried that for us in the Pacific, we are a bit late, but we are also in the process of the VMR, right?
Yeah.
the VNR process for some of our countries, and some of the countries that we have for VNR are also reporting on 3MR. So we have already conducted a regional workshop with UNDP, UNESCO. The thing is that now we know that by February you need the data, so we are hopeful that we can do that. But for me personally, as the Pacific focal point, with how many countries? 6 countries now, apart from the 3 that was earlier. There were 6 countries after the meeting in October, the regional meeting in October, which includes Vanuatu, Kiribati, and yeah. So one of the things that I heard that you guys will give some support. So for that support, is it just going to the Pacific focal point, or for us to carry out our work within the 6 countries? Eh? Thank you.
Yeah. No, that's very useful. Thanks. That should be fine. So somebody is asking if we can share the deadlines for data collection. So after this, these rounds of webinar will be finished, but then Stephen will be sending you the full calendar of schedule of activities from now on until the end of data collection and reporting. So we will send you a calendar date for that. We already have that. The challenge has been we want to be able to send you an accurate schedule given after the donor has already submitted made the disbursements. Because if we do that and the resources are not in, we don't want to puncture the momentum. But as soon as we get that, we'll send you what we already have just to give you an indication of what we are thinking. But once the funding have come in, then we should be able to give you a definite calendar of event thing for you to look at.
Thank you for that, Major. Rest assured, I'll keep the focal points up to date. As Major said, we don't really have specific dates yet, especially on the deadline for data collection, and that's because of our issues with the funding and donors. So as of now, we're looking at end of February, but once we do have the final dates, I'll make sure to share it with everyone. One last thing, I think I missed the first question, McDonald. Sorry, you had a question on inclusivity, saying that is there a set of criteria to guide focal points in ensuring that we achieve this in a holistic and standardized manner? Major, would you like to answer that, or would you like me to go ahead?
Go ahead.
I believe what you're referring to is on the expanded indicators that we're doing for this round. If you look at the emails that we've sent over, we sent a set of guidelines and a technical guide. The guidelines is about 10 pages. It's supposed to explain what we're doing. It's basically the contents of this PowerPoint of this webinar. Then the technical guide is actually line by line questionnaire on what you should answer with regards to the expanded indicators. So when I say expanded indicators, I mean all the indicators we're engaging aside from indicator 2. So to ensure a standardized process, actually we expect all focal points to fill up this questionnaire to share it back to us when they're done with it. Does that answer your question, McDonald?
Yeah, he says it's fine.
All right, I think that's all the questions. Are there any more?
So I just want to thank thank everyone for really being patient with us and participating for the last 1 hour. And we are very excited that you're part and parcel of this process. This is our report, and we will really rely on you as our champions at the national level. And mine is just to wish you all the best in this endeavor, and we remain available to support you and give you any kind of help you may need from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, and we will be sharing the PowerPoint, the recording of this webinar, and the answers to your questions through email and on the website. If you have any questions, feel free to email me and Meja, and you can also actually visit our CPDE website, we actually set up a help desk for you where you can just post a comment or a question, and the community, anyone can just go and answer. So it's a very open help desk. So if you have 5 minutes to check it out right now, go ahead. You can post anything you'd like, and it will be really helpful. Thank you again, everyone, for joining.
Thank you. Bye.